Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, Season 4, Episode 7. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on this episode is a man whose name does not match his profession, Gordon Bacon, CEO right. Emeritus at Pulse Canada, 20-plus years of leadership in the ag sector's advocacy, representing farmers and producers with stories to tell and a rich perspective of insights to tap into.
Yeah. No, Gordon is a bit of a legend, you know. I don't think he's well known across the economy, of course, but in ag, he's a reference. So I was very glad that he accepted our invitation to join us for this show.
Now, you and I are just zipping across the country here. So just a note for the listeners that the way just the schedule's worked out, I'm doing the interview with Gordon this time. Not the both of us, but you helped arrange and behind the scenes, we both work on the questions together. So where are you off to this week? Because you're about to get on a flight, and I'm in Vancouver actually.
Yeah, well, you know my love for startups, so I'm part of this program called CDL, the Creative Destruction Lab at the University of Calgary, in Calgary, and I've been involved with CDL for many years now, and so we'll be meeting 25 startups that were selected to be part of this year's cohort. Okay, and so it starts tomorrow. Well, tonight we have a gala dinner and speeches and all that. Tomorrow it's an intense day. Because you start meeting with startups like one-on-one, lots of mentorship, and it's not just like academics. You got some venture capitalists, some investors around the table asking questions, tough questions, really. It is the first session of 5, so the first session is usually a little bit soft, exploratory. So you want to get a feel for these companies and essentially what we're looking for is to see whether or not the entrepreneurs are coachable, like over 9 months. And then basically at the end of the day, tomorrow, we select a few that will carry on to the second session. So there are cuts. Typically we cut about 20% of them every time we meet. So by the time we're done, so we go from 25 and we finish about, I'd say probably 5 or 6 companies actually do graduate, and they have to actually, follow strict objectives from one session to another. If they don't reach them, they're out.
Wow. And so in this day, you said there's 25 startups. You hear 25 summaries. Like, is that the way the day starts, kind of thing?
So there's a bit of we meet them. Kind of we meet them for about half an hour, and obviously the first 5 minutes it's all about a sales pitch, an elevator pitch. Okay. And if it's not clear, well, that's a problem, right? So you want to be as clear as possible, and then we probe. So we basically just gun the entrepreneur and ask them a question about, and we challenge the model, we challenge the product, whatever it is. But these companies actually come from all over the world. It's not just from Canada. They come from the U.S. I'd say probably a third will come from the U.S. A third will come from the rest of the world, and a third will be coming from Canada. And that's the agri-food stream. So there are multiple streams in CDL. I'm only a mentor in the ag stream right now.
Ah, very exciting. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we've had companies on this podcast that went through CDL. If you remember Ixon with Felix Chung. So he actually went through the program, did very well. He did graduate, actually. He didn't win the top prize, but he did graduate from the ag stream in Calgary.
And he was the entrepreneur who's creating kind of like the Tetra Pak for meat, right?
That's right.
A packaging solution. Now,
you can keep meat fresh at room temperature or safe at room temperature for up to 2 years with his technology.
We'll have to check back in with him because he was moving to Calgary, right?
Yeah, Edmonton. He was actually moving to Edmonton. So he got some great mentorship from the program. I mean, there's one person who I would love to actually have on our podcast, Alison Sundstrom. She is an amazing venture capitalist. She basically is behind the CDL program in Calgary, and she runs several funds to support different entrepreneurs. One fund in particular she just launched for female entrepreneurs in ag, and as you can imagine, female entrepreneurs in ag there are not many. And so
we've talked to a couple, right? Remember our conversation with Katie Holtz from Grocery Shoppy, and we were talking about the environment for female entrepreneurs it's
not great.
Speaking of being together, you and I, or people in the same room, final reminder to everyone, we'll be together at the Coffee Association of Canada's annual conference, November 9th, next week, for a great day of networking.
Oh my God, it's next week.
And data. It's next week.
I don't even know what I'm going to say.
Never having stopped you before.
Well, I mean, the first thing I checked a few weeks ago were coffee futures, and they're pretty affordable.
A note to the listeners that what we are going to do, we usually record this sometime during the week and then release first thing very early Thursday morning. We're going to actually record it together. First thing Thursday morning, and then I'll edit it and release it. So our next episode will be a little bit delayed, but it'll be fresh baked, like literally fresh.
I love that community, that coffee community. Mm-hmm. It's very diverse, very unifying. People talk to each other, and they want to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. That's very rare in agrifood because they tend to. People work in silos a lot. Not coffee. Yeah. Coffee, you got the McDonald's, you got the roasters, you got the independents, you got everyone. Yeah. The Tim Hortons, you got everybody in that room, and they want to get along. They have the same goal, which is great.
It's a great group run by Robert Carter, who himself is quite a subject matter expert. So
and Diane is a force to be reckoned with, of course. Yeah, and Tony Chapman is the moderator again this year. I'm so happy. Tony is, I would say, probably one of the best moderators I've seen in Canada. After you, of course.
I don't know about after. I think we're both on the same plane. I like. I
like his style. I just love his style. He's great. He's got a great personality. He's lovable. He makes everyone. So I was interviewed by him for about 5 minutes last year. After I actually didn't expect it. He made me feel completely comfortable. I was able to say whatever I wanted, which is nice. No, he knows his stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a real pro.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's tap into the news. So lots of energy on social media around the carbon tax and the Bank of Canada, which seems to have stated.
Oh, you didn't miss out on the fun, eh?
The governor seems to have stated in some testimony that removing the carbon tax would make up about 600 basis point one-time reduction in inflation. And then the government did some kind of carve-out for home heating oil. And, of course, Saskatchewan said, hey, what about us? And everybody said, what about us? So it's a mess. Kind of open. It's opened the Me Too floodgates. Now, there's two questions. One, what the heck did you start here, Sylvain? Because your question was kind of a little bit of the catalyst. And of course, we're not a politics podcast. We're all about food. So,
of course, that's our main concern.
Yeah, is this helpful or whatever it is? Does it muddy the water or whatever to figure out the contribution of carbon tax to food affordability? And of course, understand the trade-offs. We know what the carbon tax objective is. Sustainability, but what do you make of all this?
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, I did testify myself in front of the Finance Committee 2 weeks ago, recommending a pause on the carbon tax until we have a better idea of how the policy is impacting our industry's competitiveness. I thought it was a fair request. Now, 5 days later, Prime Minister Trudeau decides to pause the carbon tax on eating oil, and which I honestly was caught by surprise. I wasn't expecting that, but what I was expecting after the announcement was going to see several premiers, industry saying, "Well, what about me?
What about me? Right?
Sure. What about me?" And frankly, I mean, I think that the pause on heating oil was shameless. It was targeting here, the Atlantic, mainly because that's the only place in Canada where we heat with oil still. And so it was really about votes. And on top of that, he announced that he would double the rebate, basically giving truth to some accusations about the fact that the rebate is not enough and the carbon tax is actually costing people money. So within 5 minutes, the Prime Minister completely destroyed many of the arguments that his government is making for several years now on the carbon tax. And so, but this week, Tiff Macklem, the governor, was testifying, but he was asked a question because of the question or the suggestion I made the week before. Because I did say to the same committee that the 0.15 estimate of the Bank of Canada was only based on 3 components of the CPI, and that's it. I don't think people actually understand this. The CPI is multifaceted. It's not just doesn't look at only heating oil and natural gas. I mean,
and the CPI for the listeners, CPI, Consumer Price Index, is a basket of goods across many industries that helps us understand,
which helps us evaluate inflation, basically. And of course, my argument has always been, well, why don't we look at food? Food is excluded from the estimate. So we've argued with the Bank of Canada about this, and so basically what Tiff Macklem said, and I did post a video 3 times because a lot of people some people will support the, I would say, overpowering narrative that the carbon tax exists to save the planet, blah blah blah, without any consideration to how our industries are being impacted. I actually think I'm actually in favor of the carbon tax. I think it's an important policy.
You said that before? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think and yesterday I was giving a lecture to graduate students in Truro at our ag campus, and I'd said the same thing. I think that because obviously in ag, the carbon tax is not very popular, but I did say that the carbon tax is a necessary evil. If you buy a Hummer, you should pay for it. I mean, that's where but when it comes to food, I've always argued that stakes are much higher, and we need to be careful if we don't know what the risks are, what the costs are. And that's been argued by farmers with Bill C-234, which needs to pass Senate. It's being halted by the Liberals, unfortunately. And so there's lots of politics around the carbon tax right now, which is why right now the issue is highly polarized. So as soon as you talk about the carbon tax or you question any estimates coming from the Bank of Canada, you will be clobbered, you will be attacked, and it goes both ways. So it's unfortunate. So what I did yesterday was to reiterate the fact that the Bank of Canada really is underestimating the impact of the carbon tax. And what the governor said on Wednesday, or rather on Tuesday, was that, well, the tax over 4 years will represent, if we are to eliminate the carbon tax, we would see a drop of 0.6 percentage point of inflation, which equates right now to about 16% of inflation, which is
one time. And he made the point it's one time because, of course, you can only eliminate something once.
You can only eliminate something once. That's true. But this morning, I actually posted 9 more questions. And let's be honest here, Michael. The Bank of Canada went after one academic yesterday on X. And that academic was me. And the only reason why they did that is because we're asking questions they do not like. He was asked a question at committee because of the questions we did ask ourselves. And that's why it came up, okay? Now, this morning, we actually posted 9 new questions, wrote a letter to the Bank of Canada, and asked 9 new questions about the testimony on Tuesday, because there are a lot of unknowns. So he did say one time, how does he know? What models did he use? What data did he use to actually model this thing? And is there any other research around the world that would actually tell us? Is the 0.6 applicable to a higher food inflation rate? What happens to consumer behavior? Have they considered how the economy would react with a lower tax bracket? Those are things that we need to know, and we don't know. We don't have any answers. And I'll be honest with you, Michael, I'm a little bit frustrated by intellectuals, academics that aren't asking the same questions we are. I mean, these are really methodological questions that the Bank of Canada should be answering. It may be complicated, but consequences are pretty pretty important. Yeah, this policy is not going away. I think it needs to continue. We need to make sure we know what's ahead. At $170, the other question I posed this morning, well, what will the 0.6 look like once we get to $170 a metric ton in 2030? What is it? What is the ratio? So those are questions that people need to ask, because we're marching towards a tax that is almost triple of what it is now.
Well, and you know what strikes me, thank you for that kind of articulation, is, as you said, there's...
And sorry, Michael, just go ahead. I encourage people to go on my X feed, and you'll see all the 9 questions I've asked, and they're pretty thorough, and they're pretty open and clear. And so it's just, and a letter was sent this morning, so I'm hoping to get a response from them. And but I did find the response yesterday to be a little direct, to be honest, because they didn't refute anything we said. Like, they didn't refute. They just said, well, you should have read our note a year ago, because we've said the 0.6 before. Whatever.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a developing story. So next week we'll get to see if the you do seem to have found the 1-2 solution to getting them to respond. Send them a letter and they ignore it, it seems, or take their time, and then you post on X and you get an answer. So I think you've figured that out.
But I find it was actually, I did check, and it is the first time the Bank of Canada has ever responded to an academic or one person ever. So it tells you. I mean, honestly, Michael, I'm a little bit concerned. I'm a little bit concerned that the Bank of Canada would do that. Like, why would you do that? And you're not refuting any information at all. All they said in their message is that you should have read our note a year ago, because we did say 0.6 before. It's not a surprise. Well, it was a surprise for a lot of people. I didn't know about the 0.6. Did you know about the 0.6? I didn't.
I don't know. And I'm not a reader of the academic papers by the Bank of Canada.
You don't read notes from the Bank of Canada every single day?
Well, I do kind of talk to them about retail, but I don't talk to them about that.
But the carbon tax policy, I mean, what the bottom line is that it's a complicated policy.
Yes.
And it confuses a lot of people. Lots of numbers are thrown around. But what's going on right now, it's the same with inflation. It's politicized, and a lot of people are just not interested in the other view, essentially.
And to be clear, I mean, not to beat this one to death, so to speak, but basically, the carbon tax is a framework that is meant to encourage a more sustainable economy, right? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, you travel around the world, everyone's talking about decarbonizing the economy.
Sure. Hard to argue with the objective. It's all the details below the top line, right?
The problem right now is that as soon as you question the carbon tax, you're seen as a climate change denier, which is not the case at all. I mean, actually, I think we need to take action and we need to do something. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not against the carbon tax at all. I think it's the necessary evil. I mean, it's the one simple thing we can do to penalize polluters. That's it.
You just want to understand, and you want the people to understand the trade-offs,
the consequences. Especially when it comes to our food supply chain. Absolutely.
Speaking of consequences, CDC's decision on milk prices. What they say, is the news out yet? It's early here in Vancouver, but
no, it's going to be out by the time this podcast goes to air, unfortunately. Okay. But we are expecting. I've been talking to a few observers yesterday, and we're not expecting a huge hike. So I think that dairy farmers are reading the room. But the only thing, what could happen is that the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission, could say, you know what, we're not close to the DFC. We're not allowing the dairy farmers to tell us what to do. So we're going to actually go ahead and do something different than what they're recommending. That's my only fear. Okay. That ego sort of thing. But, I mean, the Canadian Dairy Commission is run by dairy farmers. I mean, let's face it. So I don't think they want to look bad. So they'll probably go. My guess is that they'll actually go in with an increase of 1.75. It'll be south of 2% for sure.
All right. All right. Well,
which is good news, actually. I mean, dairy farmers need an increase. They deserve an increase, and they deserve to make more. But the 8.4% of 2 years ago is still hurting.
All right. Well, let's take a break from the news and have a listen to Gordon Bacon. Gordon, welcome to the Food Professor podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Very good, thank you. It's good to be joining you today.
Well, thanks for taking the time. Where are we finding you today? Where are you based?
Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've lived here for more than 30 years and was where I worked out of when I spent my time both with the pulse industry as well as with the wheat industry.
All right, fantastic. Well, listen, really looking forward to diving in and understanding both the current state, what's been accomplished, and then looking forward as well. Wanted to talk about, is Canadian agriculture ready? And what will it take to get it ready for the future as you see it? So, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tell us first about yourself, how you arrived at your career, a long career, great career, advocating for the ag sector, and what you spend your time on today.
I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan and went to university taking a degree in agriculture. And I spent 5 years out of university working for the Alberta government in an extension role. And then I spent a couple of years working with Agriculture Canada Research Branch as the information officer. So that kind of gave me my background in production-related, research-related knowledge and sort of how we pass some of this knowledge on to farmers. But then I had the, kind of the chance of a lifetime through just kind of connections with people that I had met in the past to end up working in Ottawa for Charlie Mair, who was minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, Western Economic Diversification, and a time for as the Minister of Agriculture. So that was really where I had my eyes open to a lot of things, both at a national level as well as an international level. And, those careers tend to be short for people. And so I think I stayed, the average length of time was about 3 years. But then I ended up moving to Winnipeg and working at the Canadian Wheat Board in market development. And so that really ignited, my passion for figuring out how you move from where you are in the market to, increase market share or be ready to adapt to changes that are going on. And so I spent, the last nearly 30 years working in market development. So traveling the world and trying to understand what needed to be done to position Canadian wheat and barley at the time. And I was in the cereal industry and then, of course, pulse crops, for the last 23 years.
Yeah. And when someone asks you to describe how you describe yourself, is it an advocate, a business development consultant, a little bit of both? How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of the work we did was, a lot of the work that I did was really focused on the opposite end of the pipe. A lot of agriculture production is sort of what we do in Canada, but by design, the board of directors gave me the job to say, you really need to understand, what it is that we can do to meet the demand that exists or how we create new demand. So I really had that really great opportunity to sort of work more at the demand side and understand, rather than promote what we have, you can't promote until you understand what potentially has value. And you can't really promote until you understand what your own weaknesses are. So it's a little bit of an industry advocate because clearly we've got to get things right in Canada from logistics and production and investments perspective. But we also need to understand that if we're going to be more than a commodity where it's just price that matters, we have to understand what the market wants, what it needs, and how that market's going to change.
Well, we're going to talk about the ag sector overall, but let's talk about pulse crops. They've gained a significant amount of attention in the recent years. Can you explain pulse crops and why they're important to our agriculture industry and around the world?
Sure. From a science perspective, pulses are the edible seeds of legume plants. Legumes are, a family of plants grown around the world in the tropics right through to, northern Canadian geographies. And the unique thing about legumes is that they're able to take atmospheric nitrogen and with a relationship with soil bacteria converted into a form that the plants can use. And that's enormously important because when we take a look at it from an environmental perspective, the biggest contributor to a carbon footprint in crop production is nitrogen fertilizer. So a group of plants that can take atmospheric nitrogen and either fully replace any additional nitrogen applications or in large part replace it are going to make a tremendous difference from a cost of production at the farm level, but from an environmental level, having a low carbon footprint. So in Canada, there's several major crops that fall into that legume family. We do classify soybean as an oil seed rather than an edible seed. So primarily it's crushed for oil. And I realize there are exceptions to that statement. But when we talk about legumes or we talk about pulse crops specifically within that legume family, we're talking about peas and beans and lentils and chickpeas. Okay. But around the world, there's pigeon peas that are more of a tropical crop. So all kinds of edible pulse crops that play an important role, not only because of the fact that they can fix nitrogen, but in a crop rotation, it's really important to have crops that you can grow with cereals like wheat or barley, with oil seeds like canola or soybeans, because what you're doing is breaking the disease cycle. Now I'm talking as an agronomist.
Sure.
You're also, sort of just rotating what you're growing, and it gives you some protection from market fluctuations. And of course, you're not planting your entire farm to any one crop in any one year, but you're able to rotate what you grow in any particular field.
And where does Canada stand in a global ranking, just so we can kind of have a frame of reference in terms of production of these crops? I hear, who was it? Someone was telling me Australia was producing some crops that I was very surprised at. But where do we stand in terms of the pecking order, so to speak?
Well, we're really the biggest exporting nation. So a country like India may produce more pulses than we do, but we are the major exporter of lentils, major exporter of peas. And we have in that category of major exporters, countries like the United States, Australia, Turkey. We see a lot of peas grown in Ukraine and Russia. But Canada really emerged as a major player, in part because we were able to develop cropping systems that worked really well in Western Canada, to have pulses, primarily peas and lentils in Western Canada, grown alongside on the same farms that are growing wheat and other cereals and canola. So it worked well. We could use the same seeding equipment. We could use the same harvest equipment, the storage equipment. We kind of had the infrastructure developed. And that's really why Canada really exploded onto the global scale as a major pulse producing and exporting nation.
Now, you were with Pulse Canada for a while. Let's talk about advocacy in the world of agriculture. Like, who would the stakeholders be? I guess the farmers, the producers, and what kind of files would you take to that to Ottawa and say, listen, we need your help, and in the following ways, what you could do could help us continue to thrive and help the nation and help the agriculture economy. What kind of files would you, if you're sitting down with the minister or the policy folks, both the provincial and federal, what would you talk about?
Well, that did change over, the 20 plus year career I was there. We certainly spent a lot of time talking about the need for investment, because if you're starting out with a new industry, you need to, have investments in research in plant breeding and cropping systems. So certainly we played a role as an advocate to have public investment into these new and alternative crops. But from a logistics perspective, we spend a lot of time talking to transport minister and agriculture minister, and at both the federal level as well as provincial levels, because, the logistics of moving pulse crops was a little bit different than it was for moving large tonnage crops like wheat or canola. As we were growing, we started out primarily exporting in containers. So these would be the 20-foot metal cans that would be shipped around the world. And so, we needed, to make sure that we had, the logistics systems, the container transloading, the rail transportation, et cetera, to ensure that we could be a reliable supplier. So I think the logistics side and the production side were really key elements from an Ottawa and advocacy perspective. And of course, we can also go back and say that we spent a lot of time in trade deals and trying to ensure that Canada was not going to be at any disadvantage from a trade perspective from duties and levies and phytosanitary issues that may impact trade. So those would be the main things that we looked at when we talked to Ottawa. But what we also spent time on was really understanding and talking to buyers and governments in other countries to make sure that we, could kind of have this end to end. Because if you can produce it and move it, but you have trouble getting it into a country, or you don't have the number of buyers that you need, you're going to be somewhat limited. So I think there's a little bit of the production side, the logistics side, and then a lot of time talking about where we were and, importantly, where the food industry was going and what role pulses might be able to play in providing value to the food industry.
You've touched on or mentioned advancements in pulse production, and over the course of your career, in the past couple of decades, what stands out in your mind as some of the most significant innovations that would characterize the modern pulse world today?
Well, probably the thing that popped in my mind first was how we changed from being primarily an industry that moved product in containers to now, bulk vessels. So we have bulk vessels of peas. That was really the first crop that made that transition. But also now bulk vessels of lentils going around the world. So you're kind of getting the savings of having that bulk freight rate as opposed to container freight rate. So that meant that, we saw a shift in sort of how product was originated from the prairies, going from what in many cases were seed cleaning plants or smaller operations to clean the product and either, put it into a container or put it into hopper cars that would be transloaded into containers at port position. So I think, one of the big changes would have been that transition to being shipped as a bulk product as opposed to a container. Now, we still ship a lot of containers, don't get me wrong. But I think it really fundamentally changed some of the players in the industry and certainly kept us competitive to move product into large volume markets like India, like China.
Sure. Now, what was the epiphany? Was that kind of a long-sought objective, or was there an epiphany along the way that said, boy, if we could just do this, we need to change a few things, we can get into bulk? Was it always an objective, and it just took some, time and whatever? Like, what was it that got across that threshold for bulk?
Yeah, I think it was more of an evolution because, we had to get to the volumes where it made sense. You had to have importing partners that, it's one thing to buy, say, 10 20-foot containers in a shipment to, now all of a sudden buying 40,000 tons of product or whatever the side of the vessel. So I think it was more of an evolution of we had to increase the production base. We had to increase the demand side. We had to, sort of develop trading partners that were able to, allow us to move in those kinds of volumes. And it was, of course, interesting for me to see when I started out, our biggest market for peas was into the feed market in Europe. And then we had an evolution where India started to take more peas. And then the market evolved again where China started to take more peas. And while some of those peas were going into the feed market, the big shift in China was moving peas into the fractionation market. So we had major investments. We had, European, German technology building enormous plants in China and peas being fractionated into their parts of protein and starch and fiber. And some of that coming back to North America, protein concentrates to be used in pet food and human food. So, yeah, I don't think there was some grand design. I think that there was just this evolution both of the scale of the market and end uses for the product.
Let's turn our minds to looking forward. So based on everything you know and all your great experience, what advice would you give for aspiring leaders in the ag industry, especially those interested in promoting sustainability, nutritious food choices, and what advice did you give your organization as you kind of looked back? You're still there as a, what is the title, CEO Emeritus? Is that fair to say? So somewhat still involved, yeah.
Well, certainly involved in the pulse industry. I'm not working with Pulse Canada at the present time. It's a very nice title, but I guess you could say it means that I've retired from working for Pulse Canada. But I am still very much involved on the sustainability side, but not looking at it just from a pulse industry perspective, because it's my view, after having spent 20 years and a lot of them talking to food companies around the world, it's my view that the biggest opportunity for Canadian agriculture is going to be in a position to address the questions that arise around the sustainability of food and diet. So to answer your question about what advice I would give in agriculture, one of the key points, I think, is to look at the end market. Rather than, I think we can talk about production, and clearly there's a huge scope of work to be done to talk about production and domestic policy. But to me, the opportunities and transformation is going to come by looking at where the food industry is going. And there, nutritious food, tasty, convenient, those are always important. But what's really emerging and will continue to play a big role is going to be environmental sustainability. And I think if Canadian agriculture is going to be competitive, we need to understand what's going on and what the food sector globally is going to be looking for. So in that area, the food industry talks about scope 3 emissions of carbon, and that really is the carbon emissions that are associated with the production of the ingredients. And so most of that, what we're talking about, is at the farm level.
Right.
So the big challenge and opportunity for Canadian agriculture, I think, is to make sure that it is positioned to address the questions and issues that arise from the food industry. And that's very different than looking at what it is that the government of Canada or provincial governments may be looking at. So we need to find a way to make sure that we're well connected on the food side, because we don't produce food to meet Ottawa's requirements on carbon. Right. We need to understand the market side of things. And right now there's a real disconnect between what's going on, at government levels versus the food industry level. And we don't even have kind of congruence at the food industry level to have the same policy and approaches being taken. So, this is both the challenge and the opportunity, is to understand how we're going to address first the carbon side of things, these scope 3 emissions. But we also have to recognize that sustainability is much more than carbon. It's biodiversity, it's wildlife habitat, it's protection of soil and water quality. And we really are going to have to ask ourselves, what does it mean when we talk about sustainability in our food supply? And that would be one of the key points I also want to make, Michael, is that we have to quit thinking just about it as an agricultural issue, and we need to look at things from a food perspective. Because I don't think we can make the kind of progress we're going to need if we just talk about producing agricultural products. We need to be talking about what it is that we're going to see that will transform the food industry and the demand for food. And this is not only for human food, but also feed for animals, which will be, part of the equation as well. Because as the dairy and meat sector looks to reduce its environmental impact, one of the things they're going to look to, are the inputs into producing dairy or meat, which is going to be grains, sources of energy, but also sources of forage. And so we, as the farm community, need to look at it not from the farming side of things as much as I think we need to look at it from the food and the demand side for the food sector.
Well, you're not the first guest to talk about even a nomenclature change from Agriculture Canada, for example, to food. Like, to really, I think it agriculture is very anodyne, and I don't think it resonates as much as it needs to with the population, perhaps the politicians. So last question for you. I mean, you've really touched on it. You know, when I think about Canadian agriculture, I think about the environment we're in. You know, you've got complex trade deals. You've got troubles with India, troubles with China in terms of exporting goods there. You've got the war in Ukraine. You've got all kinds of things happening. You've got sustainability issues, production issues. When you put it all together, is agriculture as a sector in Canada ready for the future? Is it ready to change? And as you said, the focus on sustainability. Are there any other things that come to mind that need to happen looking forward as an industry to get us ready for 2024 and beyond?
Well, we have to make sure that we're competitive with other suppliers. So we really want to continue to advocate for policies that ensure that Canadian agriculture is on equal footing with the production of food products, whether they're grain or animal-based proteins and milks, with other producing and exporting nations around the world. You know, the world needs Canadian food. We have a rising global population. We have concerns in many countries about food security and price volatility. So food trade plays a really important role. So one thing we have to do is make sure that we have the infrastructure, the logistics, and policies in Canada that ensure that we're competitive in markets around the world. So that's kind of table stakes that, you know, we need every year. And we can't get out of sync with what we're trying to do in Canada versus what we do on a global basis in terms of providing food with, you know, the smallest environmental impact that we can have. The second thing, I guess, that we really need to be looking at and playing a much bigger role than I think Canadian agriculture is today, and that is to be part of that global food transformation in terms of looking at how we're going to define sustainable food and what we're going to do to ensure that we're getting better. So I'm not a fan of aggregate measures of the sustainability of Canadian production of animals or grain crops. I think it really comes down to what happens at the individual level, and the variability we see across the fence line is really what's important. And from a marketplace perspective, I think the market is going to shift into more sustainable food, but I'm not convinced that it's going to be, you know, based on sort of these aggregate measures of, certainly not at a Canadian level when we look at the variability of production across the country. I don't even think it's at the provincial level. I think it really comes down to there will be some markets that require a little bit of product differentiation and traceability. And I think that we need to have policies that are also looking at questions like sustainability and ensuring that they understand where the variability in that sustainability is coming from, and that the policy is addressing the source of the biggest opportunity to make an improvement. So blanket policies, I think, provide aggregate measurements, but I don't think blanket policies are the approach that we want to take. They're certainly not the approach that I think the market is going to take. So I think this is where farmers and the commercial system really need to play a role. One lesson I learned in traveling around the world was there's not a great base of knowledge about what happens at the farm level. And so the farm level needs to make sure it's at some of these meetings to be part of figuring out what that solution of the future will be.
Well, I love that last point. I mean, that's one of the things, and Sylvana and I talked about right going back to the beginning of the podcast, is what we'd like to accomplish. And that was one of them, just having a broader understanding of farming and agriculture and farming issues for the broader population, whatever we can do with the podcast. Well, it's a big, complex industry, global. You're certainly a very articulate advocate. Talk about where people can keep up with what you're doing today. How do they get in touch? Are you a LinkedIn person, or where can they keep up with what you're doing?
You can contact me on LinkedIn. I am working on a few projects that we're going to be working on a prairie project to take a look at a discussion around, you know, sustainability and what we can do. And I expect we're going to have a wide range of views, some very differing opinions, and that's a good thing. We're looking to find how we work past some of the differences that exist, the challenges that we see, and look for food solutions. I guess it's one of the other lessons I learned working internationally is we can't come up with solutions that only fit one crop. we can't come up with solutions that pit grains against animal proteins and milk. We need to be looking at some of these challenges from an ecosystem perspective. And that's why I think, we forget about the national boundaries and forget about the provincial ones. It's really at an ecosystem level. We need to find out what we can do to be the very best that we can be and have metrics and policies that support that.
Well, it's great advice, very, very wise, and a great way to end our discussion together. So listen, Gordon, thanks so much for joining us on the Food Professor podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time and chatting about this. And like I said, it helps fulfill our mandate, our personal mandate of just bringing more information to consumers through the podcast. So listen, once again, thanks so much for joining me on the Food Professor podcast. Have a great rest of your day and continued success.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
I want to dedicate this episode to the founder of Smokes Poutine, Ryan Smokely, who suddenly left us this week. I think he was featured in your book, Poutine Nation. And had you met? Right. Had you talked to him? And I know you profiled him in the book. Talk about your memories of Ryan.
I spoke to him on the phone. I never was able to interview him for the book. I did ask for an interview, but his schedule didn't allow it. He was actually traveling. When I was writing the book, it was just before COVID. And he was actually opening up restaurants in Dubai, like in many different places.
Quite an entrepreneur. Great food entrepreneur.
Lots of energy. Mm-hmm. And when I heard that he passed, I was actually quite sad because like he was just, like his title was Chief Entertainment Officer. And that's really what he was. I mean, he was just a ball of energy, and he was good for the brand. To be honest. And so Mark Cunningham, the new CEO, who replaced Ryan, he reached out to me because I actually did write something on LinkedIn to honor him. And so I mean, to me, he was one of Poutine's greatest ambassador around the world. I always say that to people in Quebec. They don't know who he is because there are no Smokes Poutinery in Quebec at all. All of them are outside the province, but Quebecers don't realize that without Ryan, Poutine wouldn't be as well known as it is today. I mean, it is the only franchise that I know of that centers in its entire menu around poutine. Rest in peace, Ryan. I think you did a great job with poutine, and I think I'm hoping that the franchise itself would honor your legacy.
Speaking about restaurants, did you see the news? A third Eataly location named in Toronto. Now, Toronto, why I thought that was notable, Toronto is now the one city in the world where there are 3 Eatlys. And I predict there might even be a fourth. The
one
natural...
for you and...
Well, listen, Eataly is...
Where do you put them?
Well, I would put the fourth Eataly, if it was my money, in Yorkdale in the old Nordstrom space, right? There's a big hole at Yorkdale Shopping Center, which is the one of the most exclusive, most productive shopping malls in North America, actually. So if I was to put a fourth in, I'd put it there. Now,
actually, you're making me think here. What about Ottawa at the Rideau Center? That Nordstrom, actually, it's all empty right now.
What is it? Here's the question for you. What is it with Canadians and Italian food? My goodness. I mean, I know I love it, but it's a stalwart. I mean, it just is it's the ethnic food. It's almost funny to call it even an ethnic food, but at one point it sure was, right? Early in the century with lots of immigrants from...
lots of surveys will tell you, I mean, some of the finest, most adored cuisines in the world, well, up there is French cuisine and Italian cuisine. I mean, let's face it, these cuisines are very popular. So, and Italy takes advantage of that. Like, I don't think I've actually met someone who doesn't like Italian cuisine ever.
Yeah. And it's good for Canada, right? Because they use a lot of wheat. They make a lot of pasta. A lot of that wheat is
it's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and frankly, it's like going to an Italian restaurant is always a good experience, you know. So I'm not. They were. I think they were concerned early on because of the pandemic. They did open. I think they did open the first one months before the pandemic, if I recall correctly. But now I think I actually think that Italy is what we need to rejuvenate the food service industry, really. I mean, it's about togetherness, it's about experience, it's about, customization. It's not just about sitting down, read a menu, order. It's not boring. Italy is a different, unique experience. It reminds me of Movenpick. Do you remember Movenpick?
Oh, yeah, Movenpick. I think we called it Movenpick.
Movenpick, yeah. There were a couple of Movenpicks. There was one in Toronto, I remember, and one in Ottawa. And the Movenpick experience was really unique, and it worked for a while. So let's see how long the Italy concept will work.
Yep, it's there's a bunch of industry buzzwords. Grocertainment, right? It's like a grocerant. It's all those things together. So
that's kind of what it is, right? Italy, it's grocerant with a much more significant commitment towards service.
Now you sent, a little bit of tradecraft. You send some thoughts about what we're going to talk about in the episode. You said, this is food recession-proof. Very intriguing. What did you mean by that question?
Well, there's a lot of talk about a recession, a possible recession right now for 2024, and this question comes up a lot with media, with people. Is food recession-proof? I mean, food won't be impacted by a recession, but when you actually look at sales and what is being bought, I mean, you can just look at inflation, higher food prices. You can tell that food is not recession proof. It is not. Well, at least it's not inflation proof for sure.
Certainly not for the restaurants. Right?
Yeah, but as the governor of Bank of Canada did say last week, is that our path towards a soft landing is incredibly narrow, and so we're gonna probably see a lot of people lose their jobs over the next little while, and that's going to impact a lot of people's ability to pay for food. And so let's see how it goes. But my guess is that if we go into a recession, and sometimes I do feel that maybe we need one. I don't want to wish it, but when you look at some of the spending going on, you got to go, wow, there's lots going on. When you go to the airport, you're not alone. There's lots of people flying south and people spending. But I would say that inflation was probably a much larger blow to the food industry than a potential recession, I think. Yeah.
All right.
What are your thoughts? Right. Are you concerned about a recession?
Well, I mean, the recession's been coming next month for the past 20 months. So, listen, America, for example, if you look south, the American economy is just flying. People continue to spend, which makes me more concerned about why the Canadian economy is not as strong.
I know.
That's what I spend time thinking about. Like, what structurally are we doing right? What structurally are we not doing right that makes us start to fall behind? Productivity has typically been named as one of those things. So.
Well, the one thing that concerns me is industrial product price index, the IPPI, which I spoke about in Ottawa. I'm certainly concerned about the fact that the IPPI in Canada has outpaced the CPI. So the cost to do everything has actually increased at a much rapid rate than the CPI itself, which means that our industry is likely, that's food manufacturing, just food. It means, to me, when you look at the data, it means that the industry that we have is less competitive. And funny enough, we actually just look at a graph this week. If you compare Canada's IPPI with America's IPPI, ours was actually doing very well. We were running in parallel until 2015. What happened in 2015 in Canada?
We
elected a new government. And since then, we've seen the IPPI in Canada go much higher, grow faster than America's IPPI, which I thought was very interesting. We don't know why, but I thought it was an interesting observation.
Well, that's what I think about is things like productivity, and I'm no economist, so
no, you're right. Productivity is a concern, and when your costs go up, it's hard to be more productive.
Well, let's wrap up the episode on a fun note. So last night I was coming into Vancouver, and there's all kinds of frightening scenes in the downtown streets. Not the kind of frightening scenes we've been reading about, but it was Halloween, so it was lots of fun. I saw Americans buy more milk chocolate than any other candy type. In 2022, U.S. consumers spent $3.7 billion on candy, of which 63% was on chocolate. Now, where I'm going with that is candy corn, which you often see, connected to Halloween or sometimes the Thanksgiving. It has been falling every year since 2018. Low of 12.7 million pieces. As of October 14th, Americans have bought 3.5 million packages of candy this season. So anyway, good time to be in the chocolate business, and we hope Did you have a lot of trick-or-treaters this year?
We ran out of candy.
Oh,
yeah, and so and we bought candy for about 80 trick-or-treaters. Okay. So, but my hand was very big, and I felt very generous. So I think I gave too many candies to some kids.
I think in your mind was trickflation, like each one is smaller. I have to be more generous. So there you go.
Yeah, I think it caught up to me. I mean, I couldn't. I felt like, seriously, when you actually have a Winnie the Pooh that's like 3 feet tall,
it's hard.
Like, what are you going to do?
It's hard to refuse. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that's another fun episode of the Food Professor Podcast. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, podcaster, public speaker, and you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
We'll be back next week. A reminder, we'll be a little late in the episode because you and I will be recording it live in person together at the Coffee Association. So looking forward to seeing you then. And safe travels, my friend.
All right. You too. Take care.